I'm Jess Barrow, and this is the Ed Voices podcast. Today, we are joined by Ed Report's Principal of Early Literacy, Stephanie Stevens, and an educator reviewer, Erin Marshman, who is the Director of Training and Development for AIM Institute for Learning and Research. And she participated on some of the most recent foundational skills reviews. And we are going to be talking about our recently released reviews, our updated foundational skills review tool, and really diving into the importance of supporting teachers and students with high quality instructional materials, particularly focused around literacy. So, Stephanie, Erin, thank you so much for joining today. Before we dive into this big conversation, would love just to learn a little more about you, talk a little bit more about you, your background, your journeys in education. Um, Stephanie, maybe we can start with you. Would you mind to talk about your own journey in education, particularly connected to early literacy and sort of the value of foundational skills and instructional materials within that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, lifelong educator. I taught in Duval County Public Schools in Jacksonville, Florida, for over 15 years, and I'm a public Montessori educator too. So, Montessori is near and dear to my heart. Along the way, I was a upper elementary teacher, and then I also was an instructional coach. And what really stuck out to me in my journey is the way I was teaching at the time and what I was seeing in the classroom. But I started working for an organization on the side called Hope at Hand. It was a nonprofit. So after hours, I would go work in detention centers, alternative education, drug rehab facilitation, mainly working with teenage girls and women that were what we call at promise. And I have a heavy arts background and focus on arts. So I was going into the places to work with females and providing poetry and art lessons really with a focus on healing, right? And what I kept encountering at this time, and keep in mind, I was also a classroom teacher during the day and doing this in the evening, was that I kept coming across, if I was going to do a poem um, and introduce a poem, that a lot of the females I was working with actually didn't have literacy skills to even read the poem fluently or decode some of the multisyllabic words. And I went back to the executive director with this noticing saying, hey, I know that this is the intent of this is really to get at healing and creating our own poetry. And there's no right or wrong way to do that. But I'm also noticing, and she was also an educator as well, that a lot of the women I'm working with, they actually can't really read. And so we went back to the drawing board. I put myself through a training. I went through, a structured literacy training. I was really trying to get at like, why is this happening? What can I do? And we were brainstorming, and we decided after train, I went through like a year-long training um, to rewrite some of the lesson plans to incorporate like elements of fluent reading, breaking apart multisyllabic words. Like, how could we get these women that were literate basically to start reading in this and maximizing the hour to 90 minutes I had a week. But in that, I also had this epiphany in my own teaching of like, oh my, I was really, even as a Montessori teacher, we were still a public school and we were really taught like balanced literacy. And a lot of things that we were using was either teacher created materials, really utilizing the workshop model, and not being a heavy focus on foundational skills, even. And not really connecting, your reading and writing because you're doing the workshop model. So it was like huge, like I like to always say when I go and present, like I'm a recovering balanced literacy teacher. It took me going through training and it took me really seeing what happens in, secondary and even adult if they're not taught access to the code. Like it was really eye-opening for me. I ended up from there going to work at the state office for PACE Center for Girls and Alternative Education with a heavy focus on the reading intervention classes in the 20 centers across the state, and really putting high quality instructional materials in front of them with the teachers because you could just see like Tia Martinez's work around school to prison pipeline in action because that's exactly what I was seeing happening. And I've been passionate about it ever since. And I know that it starts in early literacy. We have to start at pre-K, K level with this work.
Yeah, no, you've really really seen real life examples of how this can impact people for their whole lives if they don't have the supports at a young age. Um, Erin, would you mind talking a little bit about your background and similarly what has shaped you with sort of understanding the value of foundational skills and making sure young students have these supports?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting that Stephanie kind of focused on the adult, like what it looks like from the adult perspective. I also have worked with in my journey, I worked with adults, um, adult students, and doing some grad work, teaching courses at Delaware Valley University, and also my position now at AIM, as Director of Training and Development. I help provide PD to adults. But primarily where my aha a moment, like Stephanie said, the epiphany moment was really in my practitioner years. I have a dual certificate in elementary and special education. I have a master's degree in reading, but in the beginning, when I was going through my coursework and had these degrees, these trainings, these certificates, I realized when I was put in front of these students, I did not have the skills needed to help them crack the code of literacy. Um, I mean, I did everything. Like Steph said, there were many after hours spent training and trying to figure out the how. Um, but most of my years was I was a second grade teacher. I always had the co-taught classroom. I always had those students that had those specific learning disabilities in reading. And why not? I had the special ed degree. I had my master's in reading, so it made sense. But like I said, I just couldn't get my students to crack the code. So I went to my curriculum director and said, "Hey, honestly, almost in tears, like I don't know what else I can do to help these students. The needle's not moving. They're still coming up red. I don't know what to do. I'm doing the interventions. I'm following the materials you're giving me. Um, it's just not working." And she said, "Oh, there's this training that we have locally." And it was a training. Not sure if we're allowed to say names on this, so I won't say the name of the training, but it was Orton Gillingham aligned. So it was all about structured literacy. And um, it was eye-opening because as I was going through the training from the teacher perspective, I've been teaching 6 years at that point. I thought, why aren't we doing this for all kids? Why is this a tier 3 intervention? So long story short, I want to keep babbling, but I went back to the curriculum director and said, "Hey, do I have permission to take what I'm learning in this training, which is really targeted for tier 2, tier 3, and apply it to our current set of materials curriculum that we're using in tier 1?" And she gave me her blessing. So I did that. So I realigned. Basically, what I did was I took the foundational skills that were missing from the set of materials we were using in our tier 1 and started plugging it in. And we saw massive amounts of growth, so much growth that they pulled me out of the classroom. I became an instructional coach. I pushed into K1-2. I also then went and worked at the 3rd and 4th grade level, the intermediate level. That was about a 6-year journey for me. I became the assistant director of Orton Gillingham training at the school, and we would push in and support the teachers and train them on the structured literacy principles while also supporting the students. In that time frame, I also went back and got my principal certificate, so I was able to use kind of apply it not just from the practitioner lens, but also from the administration lens, working at the systems level change to make sure that it wasn't just occurring in one classroom, but it was working throughout, living and breathing throughout the district. Um, and then, as I mentioned at the beginning, I ended up helping build out the graduate program for a local university so that we were also reaching the teachers that were being trained in this within our area. So really working at all different systems level. And I go back to the why behind that was because the needle was moving, the data was the data was speaking, the students were making gains. And yeah, so that was my journey in a nutshell, but always all around foundational skills, because I go back to here's all my certificates, here's my degrees, here's my training. I didn't know what to do. When following the materials I was given, I wasn't able to help the kids crack that code. So it's always been a passion of mine.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw firsthand what changing the content and giving support to teachers could mean for actual student results. So it's really hard to argue with that.
we can both say here too, like masters in education, we were still seeking like what is missing, what is happening. We were still seeking that information, even though we're lifelong educators.
No, I think that's such an important point to make because it really illustrates how having the right resources, the right content, the right approach, um, it doesn't just happen, right? Like it has to be deliberate and you found a way to bring that in, but it doesn't just like, yeah, it has to be choices that folks are making at all different levels.
Jess, I think you bring a good point up too. You mentioned like you could find a way to bring it in. And as an instructional coach, I know Steph and I have had these conversations in the past, but um, that's what some of the teachers were doing. They were bringing certain materials in that weren't HQIM, isn't something that we deem as quality. And because to no fault of any teacher, I also did it in the beginning of my career. We were all grabbing at what can we do to help these kids? So yeah, I think that was an eye opener too, of walking into the classrooms and seeing teachers use these resources that were not evidence-based aligned. These kids were, you know, doing activities, but not aligning to the research. And again, every teacher out there is just trying to do the best for their students.
Of course, like it's more about what can we do at the system level to provide that blanket support from all the way up so that teachers aren't having to spend their time and energy to do that. And students are getting a more equitable experience across the board with what they have access to. Um, I think so. Thanks so much for sharing more about your journeys. I wonder, Stephanie, I know you have a long history at Ed Reports as a reviewer, as a member of staff, just a big part of the community and sharing your expertise. Um, would you mind to talk just a little bit about the organization's journey with ELA and foundational skills reviews, really starting in 2016 up and continuing to this day?
Yeah, I love telling the story of like in 2016, since I said like Duval County public school educator. 2016, I get this call from Ed Reports, like a random call, like, what is Ed Reports? Um, and just like this impromptu interview. And I got my first ever invite to go to Chicago and be a part of the Anchor Educator Working Group. And I was like, what is this life? Like, I'm getting this, I get to go to Chicago. It was my first time working outside of my district and working with others across the nation. And in that working group, like, I will never forget some of my first experiences with Ed Reports was, really designing that tool. And in that tool design at the forefront in 2016 was the shifts from the Common Core, right? Like, and you can see that reflected in our comprehensive tool, really focus on text complexity, using evidence from the text, and building knowledge. And part of the group I was in was really building out the foundational skills portion of that original tool. And so, in 2016, when we came around, we were really looking at alignment to the shifts first, what was deemed in the publisher's criteria, and then the standards. So if you look at Gateway 1, it does say alignment to the shifts and standards, and still looking at those research-based practices. Even in foundational skills, we were still always looking at, does it have a research-based scope and sequence? Is the instruction systematic and explicit? And is it aligned to the standards, right? We always knew that the standards were like those grade level expectations, the what by the end of the year, but we were looking at, but how are we getting there as well? So the systematic and explicit instruction was still present there, but we were really focusing on, at the time when Common Core rolled out the gold sticker, Common Core aligned, Common Core aligned, Common Core aligned. And when we started the reviews, it was really eye opening that a lot of the products hadn't actually changed. They were just slapping the gold sticker on. So around 2019 is when I came on full time after being a reviewer and consultant since 2016. And we had embarked on developing the foundational skills tool. There was a need for that. Again, listening to, the public and educators talk about, but I'm using these supplements. I'm still supplementing my core. We're using this, or this, and patching, right? And so there was a strong need to design a tool that really got at the foundational skills, and we really dug deep. We worked with an advisory. The tool went through several rounds of iterations with feedback from our research advisory as well, and then launched in 2019 with sets of reviews. And then that sparked, I love that we're such a growing organization. Then it's like, oh, wait, now we have to go back to the comprehensive tool, revise that as well, and make sure there's a tight alignment between the foundational skills there and the foundational skills supplement. So then we embarked on revising the comprehensive tool. And now I can say, again, as a learning and growing organization, I started to work on the foundational skills revisions last year and around March, really starting with a listening and learning tour. The team embarked on several rounds of interviews with stakeholders, partners, educators, um, and really taking time to revise the tool based off of even like a lot of state policies that are out, right? Looking at structured literacy, what is, the science of reading that we're deeming this body of knowledge. And then working with the advisory as well to revise the foundational skills tool. Again, embarked since last March. So it's been through several rounds again with the advisory and the research team, the research advisory, to get to where it's at now, and launched with another round of materials. Constantly growing and listening and responding to the research and policy, but also feedback from educators and what they want to see in materials as well. So I feel like from 2016 to 2024, again, we're always growing and learning and responding. And now we're embarking on comprehensive revisions across, ELA, math, and science. So continually growing and continually making sure that we're responding to research, policy, and our practitioners' feedback.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big theme I'm hearing from you is we're not doing these things in isolation, right? Our aim is always to provide educators and districts with the information they really need to make these big decisions and to ensure that their students are getting the best materials. Um, you've talked a little bit about that feedback process, and sort of the landscape in general with a lot of new policies and legislation that districts are having to adhere to as they think about selecting new materials. Um, can we dive in a little bit to the nitty-gritty of like, we just released these new foundational skills reports, which used an updated tool. You mentioned already some of the pillars that we've always had in our tool around foundational skills. Would love to hear a little bit about some of the important updates that you think, you'd like to highlight about the new tool and what folks can maybe expect to see in these new reports.
Yeah, so at the start, we really took a look at the gateway system too, because that's some feedback. That's important feedback too from the field. Is in Gateway 2, in the first version of the foundational skills tool, is where we would house um, the scope and sequence, the assessments, the decodables. And we made a decision that, you know what, if materials don't go to Gateway 2, that's important information to have in Gateway 1. So we moved the research-based scope and sequence. We removed the assessments because if we're going to talk about being diagnostic and prescriptive, great to have that assessment information in Gateway 1. And we used the in-context practice of decodables to Gateway 1 as well. So that was a shift in what we're reviewing in the gateways. And then in the gateways, we put in non-negotiables. So for the first time in Gateway 1, we have non-negotiables aligned to the report of National Reading Panel. So materials have to pass phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency in order to go on to Gateway 2. And also can't have evidence of the 3 queuing system, which is something new as well. And we're looking for any type of evidence of the use of the 3 queuing system. So we know if it's being used for decoding practices, we're going to highlight that in the reports as well. So that is present in the update. As far as like nuance, getting into the weeds and excitement of people like Aaron and I that love this type of work, we can get overly nuanced, overly into the weeds, but we took a heavy focus on really aligning to theoretical models. Print concepts will now be part of the comprehensive tool, so we moved that out, and aligning to seminal research. So looking at phonemic awareness only, not phonological, but looking at how long are materials spending on phonological sensitivity before getting to phonemic awareness? Looking at the how students are practicing. So we know we've always reviewed for systematic and explicit instruction. Now, how are students practicing, and is that evidence-based? What are those structured routines are they getting to mastery? Is it all blocked practice? Is it interleaved practice? Is there mixed in retrieval practice as well? So we're looking at the how there, and then a strong focus on how students are learning, as we deem high frequency words. So making sure that we're not solely just basing it off memorization. Is there mapping of the phoneme grapheme once that is known by the student as well? So a really tight alignment on the how. I like to say in this revision, we took an understanding that there's things that are missing the foundational skill standards, right? And so we really led with research and evidence-based practices first. We look for a little bit of standards alignment and phonemic awareness only and in phonics, and then realize that we're making sure that students have sufficient practice opportunities to get towards mastery. And that's what the team really works on in consensus, to making sure that, yeah, you know what, this is a meet, it's getting students toward mastery, because that's what we want. We want students to master the content that they're being given in front of them. So that was a lot of like nuanced stuff. I mean, there's a little bit more in there, but really those evidence-based routines, structured routines, and also bringing forth, the reviewers are great at this, practices that aren't aligned, that we can maybe deem harmful. So that's something we heard from the field, like, hey, we heard the strengths of this program, but could you also let us know if there are weaknesses that we need to be aware of? So we're bringing that forward in the report, but we're also going to bring it forward in that series overview as well. So you can read that and know exactly what the strengths and weaknesses of the program are.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for highlighting some of those, the ways that we have those pillars, we've always had those pillars, and how we are updating based on what we're learning and what we're hearing from the field and what we know is vital for students and teachers. Erin, would you mind talking a little bit about, Stephanie really just described a lot of these updates and has gone deep for us on Ed Report's journey. What was it like as a reviewer to be a part of these reviews and using this updated tool?
Yeah, so I can tell you that we spend many countless hours going in and out of the materials, using the tools. We love the tools, the review tool, the evidence guide. It's our go-to. But yeah, we spend a lot of time in the materials weekly. So much so, I feel like, you close your eyes and I can see map around the material. I know where to click, like in my sleep, I'm reviewing. Um, but the coolest part, I think, is we have these tools, we have the evidence guide that keeps us all in alignment. And we use those indicators. We're specifically looking, is this in the set of materials that we're reviewing? Is it partially there? Is it not there at all? I think it's interesting too, once in a while, we will be divided. There'll be some reviewers that are like, no, it's meets, and some that are, it's partial, or not as often, but you might have an extreme of meets and not meets completely. But we always make sure we come to consensus. We have our weekly team calls. We have what I call professional debate, where we go back to that evidence guide. Let's pull it up. Let's look at it. There's research attached to the evidence guide. Let's go back into the research. This is explicit. This is what it states. Do we see that in the set of materials? And then we always come to consensus before we move forward. But sometimes it is, hey, let's pump the brakes. We need more time on this one indicator. Sometimes one indicator can really hold up a whole, review process.
Yeah, you want to make sure you're getting it right. And again, this is all evidence-based, right? This isn't like a feeling that someone has. You're all making sure you're collecting that evidence. And every single indicator is that important. That's why it can hold a team up sometimes for good reason.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point to make. And and it's very time consuming, but we're all a dedicated group of people. We're all very passionate about HQIM and teacher knowledge and the science of reading, structure, literacy, all that good stuff. So we put the time in and we do what needs to happen. I think it's just really important to know that what it looks like. We have the lead, we have the writer, we have the reviewers. It's not just a one-man show. There's all hands on deck, and we all bring our own expertise, our own background. We have administrative principals that serve on the team. We have the instructional coaches, the teachers, and all across the country. So yeah, I think another piece too is that we have such a strong background. We know what it should look like. So we have to come into our team call meetings knowing that, like, just because we know what that set of materials, how it should be implemented and what it should look like, is it explicitly listed in there for the teachers that might not know? You know, they're not all coming with the same background knowledge. And yeah, so
No, I hear you. And I think, I mean, at the heart of Ed Reports really has always been that our reports are by educator for educator. And love to hear from both of you, but Erin, if you wanna start, why do you, as someone who literally helped create these reviews, why do you think it's so important to incorporate the voice and expertise of educators into not only this review process, but as Stephanie already mentioned, in developing our review tools, as well as the reports? Why do you think that's so important?
I think that's really simple to answer. It's just really the teachers are the ones that are implementing it, right? So, my silly example would be, you wouldn't ask a teacher to do a mechanic's job, right? Like that is their expertise. So, um, that's it. I mean, I can go off on a tangent on it, but they're the ones that are using it. And again, we have the background, we have that teacher knowledge. Uh, but we need to make sure that it's so clear and so crisp for teachers that maybe don't have the same level of knowledge. So that would be my answer to that one.
Yeah. Yeah, Stephanie, would you want to add anything? I know you've worn so many different hats over the almost 10 years. So, how do you think about that, especially as someone who's been a reviewer yourself and also has been leading these reviews?
I think Erin nailed it. The most important part is the practitioner's experience. And they're the ones in the classrooms every day doing the work every day. And if we didn't incorporate their voice, then we can't even, we say all the time research to practice, research to practice. Well, you know, a lot of educators don't have time to really synthesize and think of the research, and then so to transpose that to practice, like we incorporate their voice because we use the evidence guides that have the embedded research. Then they're bringing that to the practice and thinking of their educator lens and how this would work in their classroom with their students. I think it's the most important part of the whole entire process because this is for educators. They're the ones using it. They're the ones doing the work every day in the classroom. They're the experts in my opinion.
Yep,
I just
For
say they're
sure.
the experts.
I think you all have reflected on this a good bit, so there's no stress to like add anything if you don't have additional thoughts. But wondering if you happen to have some more thoughts around, we talked about the importance of making these updates, and we've talked about the importance of including educator voice in the process. Are there other things you would want to say about why it's important for Ed Reports to sort of approach this as growing and learning? Why is it important for us to revise our tools periodically? Are there other things you would want to reflect on around the importance of making these updates in this new tool?
From the reviewer viewpoint, I think my entire career, not even just looking at it from the reviewer side at Ed Reports, but research is ever evolving, right? Like it's constantly changing, and it's our job, no matter what lane we're in education, to keep up with it. So for me, I view it as a strength of keeping up with the evidence, keeping up with the research rather. Um, and yeah, you know better, you do better, and it's not going to go away. We're going to constantly continue to change. My current position right now, we are constantly updating based on the research. I see it at Ed Reports. We update based on the research. In the classroom, as a classroom teacher, my implementation and delivery of lessons every year changed based on the more knowledge and expertise I had. So for me, I view it as a strength, to be able to identify, know where we need to change, and then even more so actually make the change. I think that's great. So that would be my little last tidbit there.
I'm like, Erin, you nailed it. And I think like what's making me laugh is like, could you imagine if we didn't grow? Like I think back to when I was 22 years old, which we won't even talk about how many years ago that was. And me, my
Fourth grade?
first year teaching, if
No.
I was still that same teacher, like give it the keys, close the door, and you're like, oh, I hope I survive this year. Like it was like about survival. Like I hope I have classroom management down, and like I think Erin, you nailed it. Research is always the whole point of research is to grow, right, and to learn and to do better. And so I think it's our duty as people, ed reporters, reviewers, full-time staff, doesn't matter, to grow with that. Like we can't stay stuck. We have to grow with the research. As the research grows, we grow. And what a great place to be, right? To always grow, right? When you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you rot.
And Stephanie, I know you've done a lot of work in the field for Ed Reports, so not just on the review side. I mean, as part of these adoption processes and as more quality materials have become accessible, you know, I know that supporting educators with a strong implementation plan in professional learning is also something that our team kind of strives to support states and districts to do. Do you feel like that also applies to these foundational skills materials?
Oh, absolutely. A strong implementation plan, like honestly, that's the beauty of the reports, right? Is that implementation plan, if you look at the strengths and weaknesses of in the reports, and then you look at your student data, that should really drive your implementation plan, maybe even your school improvement plan. So if you have a heavy focus on, like, let's say phonemic awareness and phonics instruction this year, looking at the reports and the strengths and weaknesses in that program that you've adopted will help you create that implementation plan. And I just want to like put in here the importance of aligned professional development to build teachers' knowledge as well. The professional development that teachers embark on should be aligned to what they're implementing in the classroom, right? So, and I again, this is a place where I can say I'm guilty of that. I was an instructional coach for years. And I remember like early release day, what are we going to learn today? Like, it wasn't as thoughtful, it wasn't as strategic as you would want to see an implementation plan be, where, you really laid out a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year learning around the materials and knowing that year one is going to be tough. Like that's some conversation that we have all the time, especially if it's in change in teacher practice. So that year one implementation has to provide a lot of support, teacher professional development, teacher coaching, and all of the support there. I think that's important. And we say a lot in the field to implement with intention around implementing exactly as the materials are enacted, supposed to be enacted, because you can't tell where you need to maybe potentially supplement a place in the set of materials until you have that first year of data as well. So it's just incredibly important to be thoughtful and strategic around that implementation plan and ensure that your teachers have all the support they need in the classroom to enact those materials.
In the last couple minutes, I just want to make space, and again, no pressure at all, but I wanted just to make space for, is there anything that I didn't ask you about the new reviews or literacy in general, or any last thoughts you'd want to share as we kind of wrap things up?
Something that comes to mind, which Steph, you kind of just nailed it as you were going through the whole implementation piece, is, and you mentioned it earlier, so low hanging fruit, right? But HQIM, it's so important. It's a piece of what Steph and I always say is like the triangle, right? You need your PD, like she was saying, the implementation, your high quality instruction materials, and your coaching as well. Making sure that it's being implemented with fidelity. I think that can't be emphasized enough. To implement it with fidelity and to be able to really make it all come to fruition, you have to have that teacher knowledge. So we know that that's key. And making sure that you are staying true to the program, the materials that you're using. I see a lot in a lot of different districts that I've worked with throughout my career is that it's not working after year one, year two. They want to get rid of it and get something new. Like, did we implement it correctly? And how do we know it's not working? Sometimes we're not even collecting data on it. So, the whole structured literacy approach is diagnostic and prescriptive. So that's what your HQIM is. Follow it, track your data. And as Steph said, it's going to be pretty tough, gruesome in the first year. It gets easier and easier, and you know where your hotspots are because you're going to be tracking your data. You're going to be providing the PD, making sure that you're supporting your teachers along the way. But again, just emphasizing you don't throw the set of materials away after 1 year. If you really want to make sure you're implementing that with fidelity. And that's something I see. Oh, well, this wasn't working. We don't like this set of materials. We're going to get rid of it. Like, pump the brakes. How has it been implementing? Are you implementing it with fidelity? And yeah, so that's an important piece as well.
And I just want to say exclamation point on a part that is my favorite part about doing this work is working with the educator reviewers. Like, we meet weekly after they've taught all day or been in their jobs all day. I want to say the off-star calls are at 8 p.m., by the way. So I think people like that's after they spend hours on their own looking through materials. And when we come together, I'm always in awe. I've said it before, like they know the materials, and I'm always in awe at the conversations that they have during the call. And it just reignites every time I'm on and sparks the reason behind why we're doing this work. It just is. I often also, when I'm listening to them talk, have like this imposter syndrome because they're so smart and brilliant. And I was like, wow, they like, I look at materials too, but they find the things that I didn't even see too. And I love the reviewers. I think they just bring so much expertise to this and the final reports online that I'm so proud of the work that they do.
Yeah, it's a great group of people to work with. I feel the same.
It's so collaborative.
I don't think there's a better place to end than what you just said, Stephanie, because I feel like, yeah, I feel like I've had so many conversations with reviewers recently, and I feel the same awe that you do. So I'm so glad you highlighted that. Um, okay, well, we are so thankful that you joined us and loved hearing your experiences. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise. I'm sure we will have you both back very soon to talk more early literacy. And until then, I hope all is well, and we'll see you soon.